Welcome, everyone. I am Glenda Dawson, and this is LD, and you're watching Glenda's Dragon's Den. We are being streamed on the Conscious Awakening Network on Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and many other streaming platforms like Spotify. So, just wanted to say hello and thank you for watching us and following us, and continue to send emails and messages. We love to hear from you.
Just keep at least one car length back for every 10 miles an hour, please.
Anyway, today we have a very special guest who's written books and who has a very good um, idea on many different things. But I'll let you.
He has one idea.
I'll let you
Just one.
hear from him.
This man only has one idea.
No, many.
Oh,
many.
okay.
Many.
Just checking.
Many. So, welcome, Gerard. How are you?
Thank you, Glenda. Thank you. And I can assure you, I have one idea, but I have a lot to say about it. Um, Thank you. It's so nice to be here and to be on your show and have this opportunity.
Thank you for being here.
As you say, I've written books, and a lot of my books are to do with um, the contactees of the 1950s. Um, in the 1950s, many of your audience, I'm sure, will know that there were many, or quite a few Americans who claimed to have been contacted by people from space who landed in their flying saucers. The Americans were not the only ones. The same thing happened in Europe and in South America and elsewhere in the world. But I didn't start out um, writing books on those contactees and their experiences. Um, I about 40, almost 45 years ago now, I started out as a student of what is known as the Ageless Wisdom teaching. And the Ageless Wisdom teaching is a body of teachings that was first reintroduced to the world through Madame Blavatsky. I don't know if you've heard of Madame Blavatsky, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, in the late 19th century. And in fact, she was the first. She's written several major books, such as The Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled. And she, but in her work and through the Theosophical Society, she was the first to propose the fundamental nature of consciousness as the basis of our reality, even our objective reality, and the evolution of consciousness.
Mhm.
And she stated that through the evolution of consciousness has evolved a kingdom in nature above the human kingdom. So consciousness has evolved from, say, the mineral through the vegetable, through the animal and the human kingdom, but doesn't stop there. It continues to evolve, and the people that we know historically and from mythology as Hermes and Hercules and Rama and Krishna and Buddha and Jesus, Mohammed, they are the exemplars of this fifth kingdom in nature, above the human kingdom, and they are the examples of what consciousness looks like above the human kingdom, and we can see their influence in world history. I mean, apart from the accidents that happen when people become extremist about their views, but
Mhm.
generally speaking, there's millions of Christians and millions of Muslims and millions of Hindus and Buddhists who are doing the best to follow the teachings as they understand them, without having to resort to violence or anything. Often people seem to think that religion equates violence, and I think that is something that, unfortunately, has been reinforced that idea in in recent times. But generally speaking, the teachings that are at the foundation of religions
Mhm.
um, are really to do with reconnecting our individual consciousness with the source of consciousness.
Mhm.
Every world religion, if you look at the essentials, apart from the dogma that has been built over centuries, when you look at the essentials, every religion expects a new teacher at the beginning or the end of a new age.
Mhm.
So, the Jews are waiting for the Messiah, the Christians are waiting for the second coming, and the Buddhists are waiting for the fifth Buddha. Um, the Hindus are waiting for the 10th incarnation of Vishnu, or Kalki avatar. Sections of Islam are waiting for the 12th Mahdi, the return of the Mahdi who disappeared. So that's a universal notion of a returning teacher. We also see in every world religion that a teacher
Mhm.
comes to bring a new revelation about life, about uh, finding our way back to what generally people call God, um, reconnecting with that source of life.
Mhm.
Well, the word religion actually derives from the old Latin religare, which means to reconnect. Um, and the teachings always come down to one major point, and that is to treat others the way we ourselves want to be treated.
Mhm.
So when we try to follow their teachings and put them into practice, it needs to be in those terms of treating others the way we ourselves want to be treated. Those are three universal notions that lie at the foundation of every religion. And the interesting thing through my research now is that through systems science, which is a relatively new field in science, which brings together findings from different scientific disciplines, the same picture emerges.
Hmm.
Post-materialist science um, posits that there's no such thing as matter. Of course, there's physical objects all around us, and we can touch them, and we can throw them, and we can drive them. Um, except when you go deep down, into the atomic structure of things, there's more emptiness than things to hold on to. There's actually no things to hold on to on that atomic level. It's really very fast spinning electrons and combinations of these energies that form clusters, and these clusters must be informed by some kind of intelligence, the latest science says, and this is what brings into being all the objects around us. The objects around us, of course, most of them are the product of our ingenuity, of
Mhm.
human um, inventions, etc. But everything around us also includes the planets and the solar system and the galaxies and everything like that. So in science, we see very much the same nowadays, very much the same notions that Madame Blavatsky um, posited in the late 19th century. Of course, coming in with such radical new ideas, she was slandered, she
Mhm.
was ridiculed, she was labeled a fraud.
Not to mention her gender.
Yeah, there's that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Women don't do things like that, and she was a woman of nobility too. Um, and so there was a report even that was commissioned by the Society for Psychical Research that absolutely that concluded that she was a fraud,
Mhm.
except 100 years later in 1986 the same Society for Psychical Research, the SPR, um, had a review of that report, and it was fully retracted. It was entirely retracted.
Mhm.
Um, so that's where that's where my roots are. Studying the Ageless Wisdom teaching. Her work, Madame Blavatsky's work, um, were expounded, elaborated on by other people like Alice Ann Bailey, um, Helena Rearick,
Mhm.
Murdo MacDonald Bain, various others, some of whom studied with members of what I just mentioned, the fifth kingdom in nature, who are also referred to as the masters of wisdom.
Mhm.
Um, and Yeah, these masters of wisdom, at least the ones who accept, say, people from our regular humanity
Mhm.
as students, temporary students. Uh, Most of them are in the Himalayas, in Tibet,
Mm.
and there's one particular monastery that has been known to host several of the names that I just mentioned. Now, imagine that when I read I'd read George Adamski's books. Flying Saucers Have Landed,
Mhm.
Inside Spaceships. I don't know if you're familiar with these books. They were published in 1953, 1955. Very well known. Have been reprinted, are still being reprinted by various publishers. Um, the first book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, was co-authored with an Englishman who wrote the first historical overview of accounts of extraterrestrial visitors and UFO sightings in later years. Um, and the second part was written by George Adamski. He um, he gave his account of his first contact encounter with a man from space in the California desert that happened on the 20th of November in 1952. So
Mm.
those two pieces were published together as Flying Saucers Have Landed, and that was reprinted 12 times in the US alone in the first 3 years after its publication, and translated in no less than 10 foreign languages in the first 4 years
Mm.
after it first appeared. So that gives you an idea of how immensely how what an immense interest there was in his story, in the notion that life extends well beyond our own planet. Now,
And our own lifetime.
I'm sorry.
And our own lifetime.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. 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 Indeed. Um, and his first book was followed up by an account of his further experiences with these visitors from space. He was invited on board flying saucers and taken to what are known as motherships.
Mhm.
He has been taken around the solar system, and he wrote about those experiences in Inside the Spaceships in 1955. Now, um, these books I read a bit later, and I became seriously interested in George Adamski's work in, say, around 2007, 2008, when I found out that he his first book, what was then thought to be his first book, was titled Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East.
Mm.
And then I found out through various accounts about his life that as a very young boy, he was taken to Tibet to study there.
Mm.
Um, Probably more than once, but there's we can't be sure about that. Um, and Wisdom of the Masters, the Far East, is a really beautiful, very succinct summary, you could say, a concise summary of these teachings by the Masters of Wisdom. And it was amazing for me to see that connection between my own background and the accounts of what later would become who later would become the most famous of the American contactees. There have been several others, as I mentioned. Buck Nelson, Truman Bethrum, Daniel Fry, Howard Menger, and others in the 1950s, none of whom, by the way, ever talked about having been abducted or any bad experiences. Those only appeared later when the authorities became concerned about the massive public interest in the messages from space, and the messages, um, um, you know, urging humanity to find ways to cooperate on an international level to prevent nuclear annihilation and international conflict. Um, that's only when the first stories of abductions began to appear to scare the public,
Mm.
who they found were too interested. Um, and so there were various other contactees, but George Adamski is the only one who was already teaching metaphysics in the 1930s in Laguna Beach, based on his experiences in Tibet. Um, and critics have said that when the first talk about flying saucers began following the Foo Fighters in the towards the end of the Second World War, and the crash in Roswell, and the Kenneth Arnold sighting over Mount Rainier in Washington State, that's when Adamski switched gears and started faking his photographs and coming up with tall tales about his contacts. But if you actually read his work, and I dare say most of his critics don't bother to pick up his books and read for themselves. They just parrot what some debunkers came up with from the mid 1950s onward. But if you read his books yourselves, starting with Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East, or even his very first publication, which I
Mhm.
covered in 2018, in The Invisible Ocean, you will see that the common thread is about consciousness.
Hmm.
He taught about consciousness being fundamental to life and to our reality, even in the 1930s. In his first book in 1932, he continued to do so in correspondence before he became world famous, before his first contact. There were letters which I published last year, a collection of letters to one of his students, written between 1950 and 1952, was all about consciousness.
Hmm.
His teachings or the teachings that he receives and publishes in Inside the Spaceships in 1955, a lot of it has to do with consciousness and the evolution of consciousness. And it continued into his later books, The Cosmic Philosophy, and his study course, the study of life, science of life study course. So um, Adamski was the one of the earliest. He was asked, "Are you a Theosophist? Are you a Rosicrucian?" Um,
Hmm.
and he said, "No, I've never been a member of any of those organizations." But you can see from his own writings that he was on the ball, the same ball that the latest science is now informing us is what constitutes our reality. And
Hmm.
that's why, to me, George Adamski is the most important and also the bravest of the early contactees.
Mhm.
Now, back in the 60s, we had a franchise that became huge in science fiction called Star Trek.
Mm,
And that introduced a lot of the cooperative foundations you're talking about. And I found it interesting that in its next uh, generation, literally, you found an enemy called the Borg. And the Borg's warning was, you will be assimilated. I found it very telling that that became a warning because we've already been assimilated. And the powers that be are trying to tell us that assimilation is the enemy, that we're not all of the same mind, that we aren't all of the purpose of love and unification and omnism and all of that. How does Joe Campbell fit in with all this for you?
Uh,
Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell?
I've heard his name, but I'm not familiar with his work, I must
Well,
admit.
he's sort of the godfather behind the concept of Star Wars and the Force, and the
Right,
fact that we are all connected to this intelligence, and we can choose to be on the positive side of it or on the destructive side of it.
right.
So he's done a fair amount of work as well. I don't know that he's quite as much of an academic as Adamski, but conceptually he's very popular here. I was just curious if,
Hmm.
but
Yeah. Well, see, Adamski wasn't an academic, but he was a very visionary teacher, metaphysics teacher, and of course he had the advantage of these very many experiences of contact with more highly evolved human beings from other planets. And the question that you bring up is really interesting. Even though I'm not familiar with, of course, I'm aware of Star Wars and I've seen the first trilogy, and I'm not familiar with Joe Campbell as such, um, but it does touch on the fear that many people have when you start talking about international cooperation and working together to tackle global problems. There's a lot of resistance in certain circles because people are afraid that we are moving towards a new world order, um, where everybody is forced to think the same and etc. And my answer always is we shouldn't confuse unity with uniformity.
Mm,
There's difference. Uniformity is what fascism will bring. Fascism divides people up in different uh, sections, and every section has to or fits a certain model or view of that section of humanity or society, and you can't think outside the box, and you have to fit in that particular strata of society. And unity is nothing to do with that. Unity comes out of the greatest possible diversity. Unity can only exist, meaningfully exist, if it is created out of the greatest possible diversity with people from all walks of life and different backgrounds and with all different talents coming together to work for the greater good, to work for a higher purpose. And we can see in the world how much that is needed.
mm,
um, if we continue in the current in our current line of thinking and or looking at the world, our current view of the world, competing with each other because we think that is diversity, um, we will compete each other into oblivion. We
mm,
will compete ourselves into oblivion because the world cannot stand any further economic growth in terms of uh, the exploitation of natural resources, the pollution of the air and the water, uh, and the changes that brings to the climatic structure systems in the world. We are destroying our own planetary home
mm,
by competing, trying to compete our way out of what, out of do it, that need to always be better than the next person or the next country or the next power block. That is what is killing us. Instead, if we would contribute our ingenuity and all everything, our inventions, our technology, our know-how, if we would pull that um, and compete with our past achievements and past attainments, then we will be able to build a better world for everyone, where everyone can be fed and go to school and get health care um, when they are ill. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights guarantees those things adequate housing, food, healthcare, and education to every human being just for being born in the human kingdom.
Mm.
And that connects entirely with the golden rule, to treat uh, others the way we ourselves want to be treated. It
Mhm.
is right up there. It's the highest human aspiration. Except our political, economic, financial systems are still built on, say, the notions of the past 2,000 years that are based on the idea of instilling the sense of individuality. An
The illusion
individual,
of separation.
it's based on the illusion of separation. Of course, that has brought us an important feature, that realization that we are individuals
Mhm.
and that we have our own individual responsibility, but it has crystallized. As I write also in my latest book, in the chapter about the paradigm shift that the world is now going through. Um, the you know if we would be able to step back, to perhaps get on a space flight and look at the evolution of humanity in the past 2,000 years, just like Edgar Mitchell on his way back from the moon in the Apollo 14 mission, had this epiphany of seeing the Earth against the black expanse of space,
Mhm.
and the moon, surface of the moon and the sun, and he realized everything is one. If we would be able to get on a space flight and get a similar holistic look, take a similar holistic look at our evolution over the past 2,000 years, we would see that it's these characteristics, individuality and idealism, that we have acquired, and we can recognize those in uh, in the Gospels of the New Testament. If you see those as vignettes to live by, you will
Mhm.
see that Jesus um, went into the temple to challenge the authority of the religious leaders of the time. And teaching us to think for ourselves, to let us
Mhm.
know that we are our own individuals and that we have our own responsibility.
And that
And
it begins and ends with love.
exactly, exactly. Um, and his willingness, and the willingness of his followers, his disciples, and many after them, who came after them, to die for their beliefs, sow the seeds for the other characteristic, idealism. And both of these, individuality and idealism, have crystallized
Mm.
into an extreme notion of, well, I'm responsible for myself, so I'll try to get ahead of you, and I'll do anything I can to get more than you. So it's become some kind of extreme selfishness.
Yes.
And idealism has crystallized into fanaticism, no longer being willing to die for your beliefs, but to kill for your beliefs.
Yeah.
So, it shows that the old paradigm, the characteristics that we've acquired in the past 2,000 years, has outlived its purpose and its usefulness. And they have crystallized, and they're now getting in our way. They're actually seriously threatening our continued existence on this planet.
Mm.
And it will force us, it is forcing us through climate change, through the political, economic, financial crises, um, to make a choice.
Mhm.
We have to make a choice. With the tensions flaring up again in Eastern Europe, but also at the borders of the European Union, at the borders of Mexico and the United States, and in Asia, people who have been denied a decent existence through the flawed economic structures that are based on greed and exploitation, have they no longer see any options for themselves in their own country, so they go to where they think options are available,
Mhm.
legally or illegally, because people have to live.
Mhm.
People will do anything if their future or their livelihood or their existence or that of their children is in danger. They will find a solution. So we have a choice now, as a global society, as a human society, to continue in our old separative ways and continue to compete and create more conflict and chaos and ultimate destruction, or to start working together to recognize that we have a responsibility not only towards ourselves but towards every human brother and sister in the world, um, every human man, woman, and child in this world, um, to live a humane life,
Mhm.
because we're all children of the same Mother Earth, and we all have a right to at least the basics to live. Um, and if we work together, on a global level, and it would require reform at the United Nations level. It would require that the current five major powers that hold veto rights in the United Nations give up those rights and actually begin to work as responsible members of the international community. Then we can start to solve the problems that are besetting us today and that are causing such immense dangers to our existence.
Mhm.
The original foundations that you're speaking of were part of an oral tradition. And as part of an oral tradition, they had the flexibility to adapt as times changed, as needs adapted, to speak to that next generation so that next generation could continue to spiritually evolve. And then the Gutenberg press was invented, and these things became stagnant and even more so over time. So those that hold the 2,000 years old ideals in the little picture, the minutia, the saying that God is in the details. Well, maybe you want to leave those details to God and focus on that big picture of unity. But, again, countries as far back as only 250 years are still holding on to the tenets of what was drafted back then, which is not quite applicable to the needs of the community and the evolution of science and socialization as it is today. So it's a tall order because everything is based on the illusion of borders and flags, and that being more important than humanity as a whole. So what's the solution?
What's the solution? Well, if I had the solution, I would probably be president of the world, um, or probably not.
You get my
No,
vote.
I agree that there's I don't know how you put it, but I agreed with that. What I'm not sure that I agree with is that it's also the problem started with the invention of the Gutenberg press. Um, because printing technology existed in China much longer. It was invented much earlier in China, and of course there have been uh, copies made, handwritten, of biblical texts and pre-biblical texts in India. It's not so much the invention of book printing that has led to the stagnation of ideas or the crystallization of ideas, I think, because it has done the humanity a major service in the proliferation of education. It has helped huge swathes of humanity to become literate and to educate themselves. um, like everything else, like money, like religion, like politics, it's what you do with it.
Mm.
Um, and the solution, to me, is that we don't try to force others to see the world the way we see it, but to encourage each other to do the best for the world that we can, to find our talents, to develop our talents, and to overcome our inhibitions or our conditioning, in order to make that contribution and be responsible members of society, of our communities. Like you say, not necessarily limiting our identity to a flag or a national borders, things like that. And that's where I agreed with you, um, because in the end, we're all human. In the end, we all have the same basic needs, basic human needs, and we all depend on this planet for our lives, for our sustenance. Um, and the fact that brothers and sisters from other planets are visiting us
Mhm.
to let us know that you are not alone in this vast expanse that looks empty to you from your particular point of view, which is not particularly advanced, our
Mhm.
point of view as humanity. Um, no, their it is their love, it is the love of God that they express and manifest. I'm using God very loosely as the,
Mhm.
in the sense of creator or the origin, the source of life and
Cosmic
consciousness.
consciousness.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's that fundamental love that they manifest, and that they express by coming to visit us, taking the trouble to visit us, and to help us expand our understanding of life and the universe, of life and consciousness. Um, the if you read, people who haven't read Inside the Spaceships, I would urge them to get a copy. It's still easily available, secondhand or even in print, in paperback nowadays. Get a copy of Inside the Spaceships, and you will be wowed by the the palpable love that speaks from those pages, from the wisdom that Adamski was asked to share with the world and with humanity. um, and um, it is it is through the expansion of our perception of ourselves as living units on this planet, by showing us, hey, we are here even though we are not from your planet,
Right.
that I think will be instrumental in the paradigm shift that is taking place. The
Mhm.
in religious terms, you might call it a new dispensation, as George Adamski also referred to it. And maybe if you'll allow me, I'll quote George Adamski literally from a lecture that he gave in 1955 in Detroit, and
Please
that's
do.
where, I'm sorry.
Please
Please.
do.
Yeah, that's where he said the main thing is not a question of sources, my experiences, or anybody else's. The main thing is what is really transpiring in this world. That is more important than any individual or phenomena that is taking place at this moment. He said that in 1955. It's not so much the sources, they're not here to entertain us or to create a paranormal experience for people who are interested,
Right.
or to um, bedazzle the minds of the gullible. They are here because this is a crucial time in our history, in
Mhm.
our evolution, um, and they are here in support of that event, of that choice that we are making at this time, even though most people don't think of this time as making a choice, but that's really what we are doing, and what circumstances are forcing us to do, circumstances of our own making largely, but at the same time circumstances that are formed from cosmic influences, that most people have no idea about, because we're only, a small speck of dust in the immense span of the universe. And there's Blavatsky writes about it. Other teachers in the wisdom tradition write about it. There's colossal streams of energy, just as matter, as I started out talking about, is like a condensed form of energy. Um, there's huge, significant, very powerful cosmic energies impinging on not just our planet but also our solar system, and they are cyclical. So we have now moved out of the energies that were related to the cycle of the Piscean age, the constellation of Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
At any astronomical, not astrological, but astronomical observatory, you can see, they will be able to show you that our solar system has moved away from its alignment of the past roughly 2000 years with the constellation of Pisces, and is moving into a similar alignment with the constellation of Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
Um, of course, say the mainstream scientists will not admit to the notion that there are energetic influences from those distant constellations.
Right.
But at the same time, science also says that everything is energy and everything is interconnected.
Well, at the same time, we have oceans that are moved by the force of a fairly dormant body in our proximity called the moon.
Exactly.
So if you're going to tell me that there is no influence of forces outside of our ability to perhaps sense them, I just point to that, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, and
and
rightfully
try and
so.
stop that ocean if you think you're more powerful.
Exactly. Um, and so there's these enormous cosmic influences that shape human society, human civilization, I should say, as it has over the past 2000 years, with the characteristics, very valuable characteristics of individuality and idealism.
Mm-hmm.
But with the incoming new energies of Aquarius, we now have to learn to put those characteristics to use for the greater good, and to move towards building unity out of the chaos that we have created by adhering to those crystallized notions
Mm-hmm.
of those same characteristics.
And
And it
try and
is
find a frequency of harmonic as opposed to dissonant.
yes, well put, yes. And that is the main thing that is going on now, as George Adamski said in his lecture in 1955. And that's another example of what makes him, to in my mind, the most visionary of the contactees.
Mm-hmm.
And he's always remained the most influential, but also the most ridiculed, derided. Character assassination doesn't begin to describe what was leveled against the man. He was laughed at, he was ridiculed, he was falsely accused of fraud, um, simply because, well, he was not an academic, and he was known to sometimes in his talks to ramble a bit, although he has also given very inspiring talks where he spoke mostly about spirituality, and less so about the actual sources,
Mm-hmm.
even though he had experience, physical experience on the spaceships, and he knew more about them than most other people, and especially more than even nowadays, the military people who are involved in investigating the craft that they've retrieved from crashes, or they've tried to reverse engineer. But his his vision, his understanding of life and the significance of this time in history was um, second to none. And
that's what I was referring to when I referred to him as an academic, because in every civilization, or even in every country, their academia is very much tailored to their culture. But to me, he was a universal academic because he had that broadened experience of being out of the box.
yes, very true. Well, I hesitate to call him an academic because in the 1930s, as I said,
Right.
he worked as a metaphysics teacher, and his students um, endowed him with the title of professor, even though he didn't have an academic degree. He continued to use that for some time until um, you know, many newspaper reports started to appear about his first experience contact in the desert, and of course he could not risk being accused of what you call that, misrepresenting himself
Mm-hmm.
as an academic, which of course he was accused and um, it was held against him that he was known as a professor to his students. In the early newspaper reports, that title crept in, was copied by the first reporters reporting on his case. Um, Confusion also occurred because he resided on Palomar Mountain, where we also have the Palomar Observatory,
Mm-hmm.
official California Technology Institute observatory, where actual professors were working. Um, he had his own small amateur observatory with two smaller telescopes through which he took several unique photographs of spacecraft in space or in the atmosphere or around the moon. And yeah, that was held against him. That he faked his photos, he was a fake professor, etc., etc. So that's why I uh, I hesitate to call him an academic, but I understand where you're coming from, and
I call
it's
myself a conduit.
ah,
Everything else is inconsequential. All I am is a conduit.
yeah, that's I suppose that's a good way of looking at it, and in a way, I'm a conduit in the sense of trying to um, put forward the ideas and the messages of that Adamski received and several of his fellow contactees
Mm-hmm.
against the vilification that followed, especially and I find that very frustrating. Many serious UFO researchers, people who call themselves serious UFO researchers, who focus only on the physical metrics of how far was it, what was the azimuth of the sighting, and what was it made of, or how can it be reverse engineered, or do you have photographic evidence? um, they objected, um, but all of them, they objected to the spiritual aspect
Mm-hmm.
that Adamski spent so much time explaining and focusing on, because as the quote illustrated that I just read out, that's what it's really about. It's
Mm-hmm.
about our growth as human beings, our expansion, um, the expansion of our mind, but also of our awareness and our experience of life. We have to go beyond the limitations that we have placed upon ourselves.
And limitations of our ability to perceive in the
Precisely.
physical plane. I'm going to try and shift gears for a moment because we're inside of 10 minutes and I don't think we've put up any of your contact information or anything else. And I want to make certain, because we'd love to have you back,
Right.
but this program is going to go for another 8 or 9 minutes, and I want to get some stuff up there. How do you prefer people to become acquainted with you?
Well, my books can be found on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and many other um, online bookshops.
And there's the link.
More. Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
More about me can be found on my website, bgapublications.nl. It's in English.
And
And
there's the link.
Yeah, there we are. And more information about Adamski can be found on a website that I made, with a biography and uh, concise summaries of his teachings, philosophy, his mission on the Adamski case.nl with dashes, the dash Adamski dash case.nl. Um, and yeah,
There's that
there's
one's not coming
there's a
up.
lot of information to be found there. Yeah, and my latest book, the Adamski book of UFO UAP disclosure, um, that has 7 what I call exhibits. They're basically chapters, exhibits,
Mhm.
where things that have recently been confirmed, such as, for instance, the Pentagon authentication of videos recorded by Navy jets of unidentified aerial phenomena. They look very much like the old-fashioned flying saucers. Um, confirmed what Adamski was already photographing or saying in the 1950s.
Mm.
So, photographs, anomalous materials, contact. We haven't spoken about scientists. Most recently, the Israeli head of the Israeli space program in
Right.
December 2020 uh, made the headlines claiming that contact has been made with extraterrestrial visitors,
Mm.
which, of course, is what Adamski said in 1952. Um, nuclear concerns. People will remember when in 2010, Robert Hastings, UFO researcher, put up a press conference in Washington, D.C., featuring, I believe, 7 out of a group of 120 active and former military personnel who all witnessed UFO sightings over the military nuclear bases at the time when these went offline.
Mm.
In the very first report about his very first contact, Adamski mentioned the visitors' concern with our nuclear weapons and our nuclear arms race. So on and on. So my latest book, the Adamski book of UFO UAP disclosure, uh, brings these things together and shows unequivocally how far ahead of his time George Adamski was, and that he deserves proper, serious uh, um, attention for his work.
And that's on the Amazon page with your other
Yeah.
publications.
Right.
Yes, it is. Yeah, people can find it there. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's next for you? I know you're very busy. I know you said that you've got a busy month coming up, I believe. So what's driving you right now? Because I mean, your passion is palpable.
Yes.
Um, well, for me, the coming months will be mostly I'll be tied up with work for school. I'm a teacher trainer,
Okay.
still working. I'll be retiring in a year and a half, but for now, I have students to assess, um, and I've a couple more interviews lined up for this month. Um, and yeah, at the moment, I don't have time to think about new things to write, but they will come to me, and
Mhm.
there's no doubt in my mind that there will be more books forthcoming. I have no concrete ideas that I'm working on at the moment, but they usually drop into my brain, and then before I know it, there's another book.
Mm.
I'll let you know about it when it happens.
Good.
Please.
Please.
And you're certainly welcome back anytime, because we've just scratched the surface, obviously. And just like this planet alone's been around for millions of years, and we've only been able to have the resources to disturb the solar system in the last 100 or so.
Right.
So, things are moving. How do you see us getting from where we are to where we need to be? Do you have any vision of how that can transpire?
Well, I think, as I indicated, that the crises that we have created will force us. They will force our hand. They will force us to choose. There's no way we can continue without either destroying ourselves or taking a different course of action. And of course, we have the help of the space visitors, the space brothers and sisters.
Right.
They are here in support of this crucial time in human evolution. And as I indicated, there's this universal notion in all the world religions that at the end or beginning of a new age, a teacher will emerge. And I have very good hopes, also from my background as a student of the wisdom teachings, the Ageless Wisdom teachings, that a new teacher is in the world and ready to emerge when humanity is at its greatest need. And so, a teacher like that will not solve our problems. He will not wave a magic wand and all our problems will be gone. But a teacher like that, along with the presence and more open visibility of the visitors from space, our brothers and sisters from space, will inspire us to make the right choices. And
Well,
it will
we're
still
not
be
here to
it
have
will still be a
people
long
enable us.
struggle. I'm
We're
sorry.
not here to have people enable us. We're here to do our own work.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's the concept that's getting very lost in the world today, because everybody's looking for someone else to do it for us.
Very well put. Yes. And it's really our responsibility to solve the problems that we have created, and our responsibility to look after our brother and sister.
Correct. Correct.
And our responsibility to understand that our brothers and sisters are every bit as important as we are, and that actually extends beyond the human race. But it's hard enough for people to get a grip on it just in the human race, apparently.
Yeah, yeah. But it's we're running into a brick wall as a human race, and that smack in the face will should wake us up.
Hopefully.
Or knock us out.
Or knock us out. Yeah, we will see. But I have good hopes that we will be woken up, and there's every reason to believe that a brilliant future awaits us. We haven't even scratched the surface of our potential.
Absolutely agree with you there. Glenda's going to take us home. If you could stay with us once we end the podcast, we just want to say goodbye to you offline. Honey?
Well, thank you again, Gerard. It was wonderful. And
It was my pleasure.
definitely want to see you come back and expand a little more. Thank you to the audience. It was great. Keep sending us emails, keep sending us messages. And like always, many blessings. We love you. Have a good one.